Hello and welcome to the Curator on Monocle Radio with me, Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Over the next 60 minutes, I'll be bringing some of the very best interviews and reports from the past week here on Monocle Radio. This week, of course, we unravel the crazy week in American politics.
It's slightly ironic now to hear Republicans blaming the Democrats for a rhetoric that has led to this kind of attack. I mean, that was very much Donald Trump's rhetoric.
Plus, a conversation with Brazilian architect Isay Weinfeld.
This is not my cup of tea, let's say. It's not the way I feel. It's boring to do the same thing, even in my office.
All that and much more in the next hour here on The Curator with me, Fernando Augusto Pacheco. We start the show with the defining story of the week, the assassination attempt against former US President Donald Trump. Let's unpack the story of this in-depth reportage that appeared on Monday's broadcast of The Globalist.
Just after 6 p.m. on Saturday, the former President of the United States and presumptive Republican nominee Donald Trump took to the stage to address a campaign rally in Butler, a city about 30 miles north of Pittsburgh. Less than 10 minutes later, multiple shots were fired towards the stage. Trump grabbed his ear and then dropped to the ground. He was immediately surrounded by Secret Service officers. Instructing them to wait as they tried to escort him off the stage, Trump clenched his fist, posing for photographs against the stars and stripes behind him, his face streaked with blood. Leaving to choruses of USA, USA from his fans in the stadium, Trump was checked at a medical facility. He later issued a statement on his social media platform, thanking law enforcement officials for their quick action after he was shot with a bullet that pierced the upper part of his right ear. He also said God alone prevented the unthinkable from happening and called on Americans to remain resilient and show our true character. The shooter, a 20-year-old called Thomas Matthew Crooks, was killed at the scene, or neutralized, as the FBI like to put it. One spectator died and 2 more were critically injured. Our North America editor, Chris Lord, is on the line. Chris, aside from the initial shock, how has this been covered in the US? Has there been a partisan attitude from the media, or have the calls for unity landed?
I think the main thing that you hear and read across the media today and across Sunday's media in the US has been an attempt to capture this mood and feeling of a nation exhausted. I think many people went to bed on Saturday night after that attempted assassination, frightened, fearful, worried about what kind of precedent this sets for the beginning of this, really the sort of very beginning, if you like, of the proper campaign, where as we go now into the Republican National Convention on Monday, that really kicks things off in a way. And I think lots of people spent that night fearful about what this means. So the media really tries to capture that, I think, a little bit to sort of stay above the fray of what is really roiling on social media, which is a minefield of conspiracy theories. But what you do find, I think, that's across the board is this narrative emerging of concern about the Secret Service, concern about the security response and if you like, or rather the sort of preparedness on the part of the security services for what happened on Saturday evening, how the shooter was able to get as close as he did. And of course, there are now congressional Republicans calling for an inquiry into the Secret Service, and some asking as well very vocally whether there was a dereliction of duty in what they did. But I think when the media fundamentally, the narrative that is coming across mostly is, there are huge calls for unity, huge calls to, as President Biden did this evening in the Oval Office, dial the temperature down. But I think for a lot of Americans, that's just not the case. People are worried, fearful, and in many cases quite angry.
Now, Trump insisted that the Secret Service wait before taking him off stage. He then stood, his fist raised in the air with his bloodied face, flag flying behind him. This image was flashed around the world. One couldn't buy PR like that. What will that image mean for the election?
I think that image will come to define this election. I think it will be an extremely motivating factor for those people who maybe felt unsure about Donald Trump. And I think when we go into the Republican National Convention this week, what you will find there is some of those who were very cautious about the nominee, the candidate for their party, will rally around him now in the days ahead. And he's on his way, or he's been on his way on Sunday evening to Wisconsin to appear there with a big bandage over his ear. And the New York Post managed to actually get an interview with him, and he's clearly not lost his sense of humor slightly as well, because even he described it as being the most iconic photograph he's ever seen. He said, usually you have to die to get such an iconic picture. Nevertheless, it will galvanize a lot of people who will, I think the image of him pumping his fist and shouting, fight, 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 really cuts through. So it's a moment in a way, I think, where when you have on the other side of things and the Biden campaign struggling to know who's going to be the person actually leading this campaign, despite what President Biden wants to keep battling on through November, all those concerns. And then meanwhile, you have now this very re-energized campaign, and that photograph is going to be on T-shirts. And as I was just looking, tattoos are already being made of that very moment on people's body parts. So it's an iconic thing that will come to define this election.
Thank you, Chris. I trust you're not going to get inked yourself. I'm going to bring in Nick Bryant now, who's the author of Forever War, America's Unending Conflict with Itself, and a former BBC correspondent in both Washington and New York. Nick, your book tells the story of how America's extreme polarization is 250 years in the making. You write that division, mistrust and misinformation are now the country's defining characteristics. The storming of the Capitol, the prosecution of Trump, battles over gun rights, abortion, etc. They all raise the spectre of further political violence and even the possibility of a second civil war. Well, is that where we are now? I mean, Trump's called for unity, but were the shots fired by crooks perhaps the opening salvo of the next US internecine conflict?
Well, I certainly hope not. And America has an awful lot of muscle memory when it comes to its extreme polarization. As I say in the book, it's 250 years in the making. Of course, there was that rupture in the middle of the 19th century that led to a civil war in which tens of thousands of Americans lost their lives fighting their fellow Americans. I don't think we're at that point now. It's a different situation. There isn't the same geographic divide. There isn't the single issue divide. We talk about the red and the blue states, but a lot of red states have a lot of blue blobs in them, like Texas, with cities like Dallas and Houston. So it is different, but division has always been America's default. That goes back to the founding days of the American Republic. Political violence has been a continual thread of the country's history. And I think that's what makes what happened on Saturday shocking but unsurprising in many ways. 4 American presidents have lost their lives as a result of political violence. Abraham Lincoln, James Garfield, William McKinley, John F. Kennedy. So many other presidents have been targeted in assassination attempts. FDR, Harry Truman, Theodore Roosevelt, Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, Ronald Reagan, of course. So what we saw on Saturday wasn't a watershed moment for America. It was a continuum. It's a continuation of a story that goes back 250 years.
When Trump posed for that iconic photograph, he was saying, fight, fight, fight. And interestingly, those were the words he used just before his supporters stormed the Capitol on the 6th of January. Is there some conclusion to be drawn from that?
Well, violence has always been central to his political approach and his political credo, and it also explains much of his political appeal. I mean, when he first emerged in 2015 and was telling his supporters at rallies to beat the crap out of people and stuff like this, that was one of the reasons why he established such a sort of visceral connection with so many people who became the MAGA faithful over the years. He has escalated the political rhetoric in America. It's slightly ironic now to hear Republicans blaming the Democrats for a rhetoric that has led to this kind of attack. I mean, that was very much Donald Trump's rhetoric, and it has been for many years now. But that shot is instantly iconic. As Chris was saying, it is going to rally the Republican Party. History shows that America tends to like strong presidents, even strong man presidents. They tend to punish the weak and the frail. And that's what this election looks like at the moment. And that's how it will increasingly be framed. Donald Trump, who survived an assassination attempt and then showed his sort of machismo by shouting, fight, 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 and a deeply divided Democratic Party at the moment with an elderly candidate who does look rather weak and rather frail.
And later in the week, of course, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance has been announced as Donald Trump's running mate and potential vice president. Andrew Mueller explains his background and the likely reasons for his nomination.
The vice presidency of the United States is a job frequently joked and or bitched about, not least by those who have done it. John Adams, who did it first, sighed that my country has in its wisdom contrived for me the most insignificant office that ever the invention of man contrived or his imagination conceived. John Nance Garner, vice president to Franklin D. Roosevelt, whined that the position was not worth a bucket of warm spit. He may not actually have said spit. Thomas Marshall, vice president to Woodrow Wilson, joked about two brothers. One ran away to sea, one became vice president. Neither was heard of again. As things stand, however, the next vice president of the United States has at least an average chance of inheriting Earth's most powerful office. Both presidential candidates are old men. We already know who the Democratic nominee for Veep is. Barring some dramatic redrafting of their lineup, it will be the incumbent, Kamala Harris. This week, the Republican analogue was announced.
The question is on the motion that Senator J.D. Vance be nominated by acclamation. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye! All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
Senator James David Vance of Ohio, who goes by J.D. So, why him?
He is a patriot who loves America. He loves Ohio. He loves his family. He's a great father. He's a great man. And that's what we need in this nation today.
It can be safely assessed that a couple of the usual criteria do not apply. J.D. Vance has not been shoehorned onto the ticket to persuade wavering voters in a swing state. Trump won Ohio handily in the last two elections and is polling a mile in front this time. Nor is there any ostentatious demographic balancing going on. Vance is, like Trump, a white male. Vance is, however, a hedge against one unarguable criticism of Trump, i.e. that he is the second oldest man ever to run for president. Vance, at 39, is barely clear of the minimum age criteria for the job. It is not historically uncommon for presidential candidates of a certain vintage to run alongside a reassuringly youthful heir. When George H.W. Bush, then 64, ran for the presidency in 1988, he brought along Indiana Senator Dan Quayle, 23 years his junior. For perspective, Quayle remains younger than either Donald Trump or Joe Biden. Other aspects of Vance's resume are, it should be acknowledged, altogether praiseworthy.
He knows what it's like to live in poverty, forgotten by Washington politicians. He is dedicated to ensure that no American is ever forgotten again.
His family were poor, his upbringing troubled, and he has made a considerable amount of himself in a short time. He joined the US Marines straight out of high school and served in Iraq, if in a non-combat role as a military correspondent. After leaving the Corps, Vance graduated from Ohio State University and Yale Law School, wrote the acclaimed best-selling memoir Hillbilly Elegy, we'll come back to that, made some money in tech investment, and in 2022 was elected to the US Senate by his fellow Ohioans. He is now the Republican Party nominee for the vice presidency of the United States and does not turn 40 until next month. But none of the above are quite the real reason for Vance's preferment. Vance has been on a couple of philosophical journeys which have combined to deliver him to his current destination. He was, for a time, a prominent and voluble member of that commendable cohort of conservatives who had correctly identified Donald Trump as preposterous anathema to everything for which the Republican Party traditionally fancied itself standing. God, country, family, decency, probity, courtesy, not abjectly snivelling to Russia, that kind of thing.
I'm a never Trump guy. I never liked him. I think that he's noxious and is leading the white working class to a very dark place.
Vance was also a plausibly thoughtful advocate for America's underclasses, though Hillbilly Elegy is not an especially good book, and the film is just dreadful. Much more lucid and much less mawkish explanations and evocations of modern American blue-collar poverty and white working-class alienation are available, at which the Foreign Desk Explainer will heartily recommend reading Sarah Smarsh's Heartland to a soundtrack of Drive-By Truckers' Southern rock opera. In more recent times, however, Vance has gone full hyper-conservative headbanger, taking fundamentalist positions on abortion, the Kremlin line on Ukraine.
I think it's ridiculous that we're focused on this border in Ukraine. I got to be honest with you, I don't really care what happens to Ukraine one way or another.
The denialist stance on climate change, and even indulging Trump's absurd, unevidenced fantasies of having won the 2020 presidential election. Vance has spoken favourably of Alex Jones, the foil-hatted blowhard recently bankrupted by lawsuits occasioned by his assertion that the 2012 massacre at Sandy Hook Elementary School was a hoax.
One of the things that I saw in the reaction to that tweet was people are terrified of unconventional people, of people who don't think the thoughts that they're supposed to think. And that, to me, is like the opposite of what you would want in an elite. You would want an elite that's willing to think outside the box, that's willing to say, well, maybe this is like a crazy idea, but maybe it's true.
As ever with such pivots, it is debatable which would be worse, that Vance actually believes any of this or is merely pretending he does.
What is the first truly Islamist country that will get a nuclear weapon? And we were like, maybe it's Iran, maybe Pakistan already kind of counts. And then we sort of finally decided maybe it's actually the UK, since Labour just took over.
Trump's previous pick as vice president, Indiana Governor Mike Pence, was an attempt of sorts to balance the ticket. To balance, that is, a thrice-married career conman and associate of a child trafficker with a pious heartland Christian with some experience of government. That relationship was sundered, as a relationship will be, by Trump taking an at best equivocal view of threats by his own supporters to lynch Pence for standing firm, as Trump sought to overthrow the constitutional order in January 2021. But Trump, having long since elicited an uncharacteristically forgiving attitude from America's evangelicals, no longer needs to court them so obviously, and is therefore at liberty to double down by accompanying his bad cop with a worse cop.
Pursuant to Rule 40D of the rules of the Republican Party, I formally declare President Donald J. Trump and J.D. Vance as the Republican nominees for President and Vice President of the United States.
For Monocle Radio, I'm Andrew Mullett.
You are listening to The Curator, here on Monocle Radio with me, Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Chef René Redzepi has shaped what the world understands as fine dining today, to the point that his name is sometimes used as a byword for experimental cuisine in popular culture. He has pushed the boundaries of what it means to cook at the highest level. He has defied expectations by deciding to shut down his hallowed restaurant Noma in Copenhagen at the height of its success. And now he's taking another surprising career turn by releasing a documentary about food, Omnivore. Each of the episodes in the series hones in one specific ingredient, from bananas to salt. Try not only to explain their history, but also their production and how it is threatened by climate change. Monica Lillis, the producer of Monocle's food and drink program The Menu, sat down with René and executive producer Matt Golding to find out more.
Matt and René, it's such a pleasure to have you here on The Menu. I wanted to start at the very beginning and ask you about the title of the documentary, Omnivore. What made you land on that?
many hours of meetings and incredible amounts of paper with incredible amounts of names on there from, I can't remember, I feel like we've had just about any name you can imagine. For some reason, it feels it was almost the most difficult part of making this show was coming up with a name that we all could agree on. That's how I remember it.
It was. I mean, I can remember having reams of paper here in Noma of just hundreds of names. And we ended up with omnivorous at first. And that was kind of what we were going with for a little while. And then we just shortened it to omnivore. And I think omnivore ultimately, of course, it's who we are, right? We eat a little bit of this, we eat a little bit of that. It's a wide open menu. We're not here to cover one specific corner of the food world as much as we are to really explore all of its breadth and beauty.
And Matt, the documentary is so beautifully shot, and you've, of course, worked on plenty of other food television, most notably with the late Anthony Bourdain. What made you decide to choose a documentary series for this project, and why is visual storytelling so important when it comes to food? I mean, I think when you look at food television, obviously it's come an incredibly long way over the last 20 years. And people like Anthony Bourdain did an incredible amount of work in sort of showing the world that food is more than food, right? You know, I think he did a really special job in particular when it came to food and politics and food and culture. But when Renee came and called me up and said, hey, would you be interested in working together? It was a dream, because what Renee has always done so well in his cooking and at Noma and his relationship with food is tying it right back to the natural world. And that meant, I think, one of the first pieces of inspiration that Renee shared with me was Planet Earth. What if we took the scope and the scale and the sense of wonder and awe that you feel when you watch David Attenborough do his thing in a nature documentary like that, but we applied it to food? What could we do with that? And I think ultimately, what we tried to do with Omnivore was tell both these big, wide, broad stories with, you know, the kind of the gorgeous visual storytelling that you can do in the world of documentary, as well as these very specific, intimate tales. And so we'd have episodes where we traveled tens of thousands of kilometers around the world, like Chile, where we moved from Renee's childhood in Macedonia to Louisiana to Bangkok and back to Copenhagen. And then we have episodes like Pig, where we just live in one small village in central Spain. I think it's those textures. It's that way to kind of twist the aperture of the camera, so to speak, so that you don't fall into a formula, that you use every episode as an opportunity for a different style of storytelling. Yeah, absolutely. And for the listener who won't have watched the series yet, it's split into 8 episodes with ingredients as titles. So coffee, banana, chili, salt, tuna, pig, rice and corn. Why these ingredients in particular?
Well, we had a list of, I think we have a list still of more than 100 ingredients through which we could have made this show. And at first, perhaps there was a few more big world-altering staples on there, like we could have had potatoes on there as well, for instance. But we quickly saw that if we were to do that, we're worried that the stories would be too similar. We'd needed a range of stories and to have all the different concepts for each episode be loose and not terribly tied to one another. So, for instance, you can have chile, which is an ingredient unlike corn or rice that hasn't changed the fate of nations, or that doesn't offer any giant caloric value in a daily life. It's a love story that we have. And so that, you know, is a theme for our episodes, and probably will be if we ever get to do a season 2. The theme is love, that we fall in love with things as a people, and it's something that seasons our food and makes us happy, you know. And so that's kind of how we chose it. Once we really start diving into it, how do we build these stories properly? How do we, Matt always said, make the concept album where each tune is like different to one another. And at the end of it, you've really been somewhere. You've explored and you felt something.
So that brings me nicely on to my next question. Because these ingredients are very much all universally used, albeit in very different ways, what do you think this says about human nature, and how do these ingredients end up bringing us together?
I mean, I think one of the most remarkable parts of the story of food is to watch how these ingredients have traveled from their birthplace, right? I mean, ultimately, every one of these ingredients started somewhere as a wild food. And over centuries and millennia have been transformed by us. Ultimately, a pig is in a way a human recipe. Corn in a way is a human recipe. We have chosen and selected and bred and crossbred these ingredients into more efficient, more delicious expressions of themselves. And so when you watch something move from the jungles of South America, like Chile, and make its way across to Portugal, into the Iberian Peninsula, and from there to India and to the Far East, and suddenly become a part of not just the cuisine of places like Thailand, but the culinary fabric, the cultural fabric, I should say. You see really quickly how there are these universal elements that tether us together. You know, our desire for something, for an exclamation point in our lives. In the case of chili, you know, that's something that we're seeing more and more as the world gets spicier and spicier. That 20 years ago, it was probably really hard to find these chilies in Denmark. Not a particularly spicy cuisine here in Denmark. But today, you know, we grew the ghost peppers that are in the episode for chili in the Noma greenhouse.
The Boot Orange Copenhagen.
That's right.
In that sense, food is wondrous and it's amazing because in many ways, you know, if we fall in love with an ingredient, most likely we mess it up. We eat it into extinction, or we start breeding it in ways that are, you know, because we need so much of it, it needs to be as cheap as possible. And so we create these systems that are not really super healthy, but they do provide calories and work, but it could be better. But at the same time, we also have so many similarities. You know, when wheat finds its way to all corners of Earth, we make flatbreads, all of us, sometimes unbeknownst to one another. You know, we ran into flour, and there's maybe not a million, but perhaps there's hundreds of variations of flatbreads from northern Sweden, near the Arctic Circle, to Mexico, northern Mexico, and everywhere in between. So food has that, you know. One of the concepts is also that we should remind people through watching this show that you and I are the same, and we eat the same, and we want the same, which is to be happy and to explore things and to enjoy, you know, and we look and go about it in different ways. And we need to perhaps make food be that place where we meet.
And for my weekly Global Countdown, I had a lot of fun this week, where I was doing some research on the Uzbek charts, and I was impressed with the extravagant pop scene out there. Let's have a listen.
And that music can only mean one thing, which is, of course, that you should by now have thrown your radio into a pond and taken shelter in the basement. It is time for our weekly Global Countdown with Monocle's senior correspondent, Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Fernando, and God help us all, where are you taking us this week?
I'm very excited. As usual, I'm excited.
You're always very excited, Fernando.
Excited.
It's like on air, off air, Global Countdown, not Global Countdown. It doesn't get tiring.
But listen, we're going to Uzbekistan, and what a fantastic music scene they have. I mean, I would recommend people to go to Tashkent and go to a discotheque. I mean, it's incredible.
A discotheque in Tashkent?
Yeah.
That
could be the name of my favorite album or something.
Have you ever been to a discotheque in Tashkent?
Unfortunately not, but I'm planning to. After listening...
You are literally planning to.
Listen, you will understand what I'm saying here, because number 5, I mean... It's funny because I describe this song as a story about broken love with a lovely disco beat in the background. It is by...
That's an audacious melding of soundtrack and theme.
It's Teodora Niozova with Yugur, which means run.
she dancing through the tears, Fernando?
She's not quite dancing. She's like on the stairs and kind of being all dramatic.
She's waving wistfully back and forth.
She's very.
Is she threatening to hurl herself down them? Do you think?
Not quite. No, thank God for that. But
well, indeed.
She's very glamorous. I mean, she's wearing kind of a headscarf, and her skin is fabulous. I think people in Uzbekistan, they spend a lot of money with skincare. They must. Is
that the money they save on hair care?
Probably.
At number 4.
Number 4, this is a more traditional Uzbek ballad. It's by Botir Kodirov, and the song's called Sevigizi Yolag Onen, which means love is a lie. Also great skin.
Well, yeah, I know, but which clearly wasn't enough. I mean, the poor fellow, he is bereft.
Bereft.
The too long didn't listen there is she's done him wrong. She's run off with the Pilates instructor.
At least he's rich because he's singing close to his Mercedes on the riverbank. I was trying to...
Do we know it's his Mercedes? I mean, anyone can stand next to a Mercedes.
That's true.
It might be second hand.
It's a beautiful riverbank. I thought it was in Tashkent, but then I was Googling images of Tashkent. I don't think it was in Tashkent. Maybe because he does go to Dubai quite a lot.
I don't know if there's much of a river in Dubai either, to be honest.
That's a very good one, actually. So I have no idea. So
it could be a green screen thing. The whole thing might be a total hoax.
But there's some controversy about this singer because apparently he's claiming to be the son of an Uzbek artist called Sherali Joreyev who died last September. So now there's a whole controversy in Uzbek press that apparently, I mean, they might have to look at the body. It's all very morbid.
So hang on, what? I do not understand why any of this would necessitate exhuming the corpse of a recently deceased Uzbek pop singer.
It's all very confusing, but then members of the family of Sherali are saying, no, he's not the son.
Is he claiming to be the son, or is this claim being made on his behalf by others? I mean, and to be
claiming himself.
To be very clear, I could not care less.
From what I've read at the Uzbek press, from very confident sources, he's claiming himself.
The global countdown has gone to a dark place this week,
yes,
Fernando.
I'm sorry.
And we've still got 3 songs to go.
Number 3, I think, is a bit more chilled.
Well, that would not be difficult.
It's a very complicated name, this one. His name is Jalolidin Ahmadliev with...
Well done.
Kuydurji. Shall we have a listen?
Just to be clear, nobody, as a consequence of that song, is going to have to dig up a corpse.
No, thank God.
That's something.
Actually, on a more positive note, one thing that I found out about Jalolidin is how much he charges for a wedding. Apparently, in the Uzbek press,
is this to perform at one, or to be the participant?
To perform at one.
Okay, this is not some sort of visa racket he's running.
He's one of the most expensive ones.
Okay,
I mean, still mildly affordable, at least for London standards. It's with $3,000, you could invite Jalolidin for your wedding. It's expensive. He's one of the most expensive ones.
And for $6,000, he won't come?
Exactly. I'm not sure if I would hire him. I think Diodora, number 5, is better. She must be cheaper, actually, on that list. So
is this something all Uzbek pop singers do? Like, next to their entry on the chart, is there the current rate for them to perform at a wedding?
I'm not joking, but I think so, because there's been a lot of articles on Uzbek press how much you can hire an artist for. I love how open they are about this. I wish we could have that as well. How much you can charge for Britney, Beyonce, or whatever, you know?
I mean, if he's getting, what, $3,000 a shot? I mean, I'm in the wrong racket. I'm going to move to Uzbekistan and become a pop singer.
Yeah, just do 2 weddings a week and that's fine.
Exactly. At number 2.
Number 2, that's an amazing one. This song is a Technicolor fantasy. She's a 49-year-old, very glamorous. It's the great Ozoda with Kokçulugi, which means blue skies, I believe. Let's have a listen.
From which I glean that those annoying 1980s electronic drums have just reached Uzbekistan. Do we know what she charges to do a wedding?
No, that was you know what? I think Ozoda, she's a legend. So I think it's more than $3,000. Please, Ozoda, have some respect.
And that is a more upbeat tune. You can kind of see that as a floor filler shortly before the DJ resorts to Hi-Ho Silver Lining.
But she's affecting the car companies in
She's affecting the car companies.
You know why? Because there's a blue car in the video. So there's a lot of blue in the video. She's wearing
a Mercedes.
It's not a Mercedes.
Okay.
It's actually one of those old vintage cars. I don't know their names.
Righto.
She's wearing like a turquoise pantsuit. It's all about blue. So basically the number of blue cars sold in Uzbekistan, they rose this year because of this song. So, it's the power of Ozoda. I'm telling you.
Fernando, I think I'm beginning to have certain doubts about the fact-checking regimes at certain Uzbek news journals. But okay, why not? Number one, in Uzbekistan, and obviously given that we have already had somebody revolutionizing Uzbekistan's automobile industry, someone else having to dig up a corpse for reasons I don't really understand, there's a high bar to clear here. To get to number one in Uzbekistan this week, you have to have done something remarkable.
He's remarkable. And to be honest, let's be serious. He had a very tough childhood. He comes from a very poor background, but now he's the biggest star in Uzbekistan. And you know what?
Well, that'll show them.
Looking at the numbers, I mean, this song, it had 132 million views on YouTube.
Okay.
And he's very funny. I mean, he looks very camp. He wears a huge mustache, and he likes kind of a blue kind of suit as well.
This is a thing, clearly.
It's a thing. Let's have a listen to Zandan Zobirov with Malohat, which means comfort.
That is dreadful, Fernando. It does have electronic, annoying drums in it. I rather suspect that an earlier demo of that tune may have involved an accordion.
I don't know about that. All I know, there's no blue cars. Apparently there's a green car in the video. And just to describe the video, it looks very, although it's quite camp and extravagant, it looks quite expensive. It starts with a lot of women wearing pink dresses at the top of a mountain, doing a very special choreography.
How did they get up there? What shoes are they wearing?
To be fair, it's not the Everest. I mean, it was not such a big, tall mountain.
More of a hill than a mountain.
Yeah, I think I was exaggerating here, but it looks beautiful. Maybe it's the sound of music a la Uzbekistan,
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
We're back with the Curator, and I am Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Tokyo's Sanjanjaya neighborhood is often overlooked due to the bright lights of nearby Shibuya. But its diverse food scene, cozy coffee shops, and tucked-away speakeasies make it well worth the visit. Hannah Fan takes us on a full-day culinary tour over the sleepy corner of the city.
Sanganjaya, or Sancha to locals, is a charming area of West Tokyo filled with independent eateries and bars. Idyllic quiet backstreets are packed with hidden gems offering everything from concept sushi restaurants to cocktail joints, buzzing izakayas and decadent burger spots. Only 5 minutes away by train from the lively Shibuya, this laid-back locale is the perfect antidote to the hustle and bustle of Tokyo. Start your day off exploring Sancha slow with a coffee and a pastry. Down the street from the main station is Junibun Bakery, a welcoming boulangerie fusing Japanese flavors and Western baking techniques. Inside, you're greeted with rows of delicate cakes, baguettes filled with butter and red bean paste, and an assortment of donuts. The bakery also doubles as a flower shop. As soon as you enter the cozy space, the smell of freshly baked fluffy bread loaves and delicately arranged pastel flowers hits your nose. Grab a coffee, a slice of strawberry cheesecake, and peruse the plants. Once you've worked up an appetite strolling around Sancha, hopefully with pit stops at the tranquil Setagaya Park and the serene Saishoji Temple, walk down a leafy residential path filled with friendly neighborhood cats and Shiba Inus, and you'll find Bear Pizza Poco. This small pizzeria is the ideal eatery for a long, leisurely lunch in the summer. While they offer full-size 30-centimeter pizzas, I recommend getting their smaller tanto sizes to try as much of their menu as possible. My favorites are the 4-cheese, calabrese, and the classic margarita. While you're there, make sure to grab one of their freshly squeezed lemonades and enjoy the cool Tokyo breeze. If after that you're still peckish, pop over to the Sun Loves Here for the fluffiest freshly made cheesecakes. The cafe stays true to its name. Lots of natural light pours in as a mix of Japanese and Western indie music plays over the speakers. It's the best place for an afternoon respite. The blueberry cheesecake is a standout and pairs well with their refreshing iced lattes. Do try a bottle of their chilk, cheesecake custard, if you get the chance. There's an abundance of great sushi places in Tokyo, but none quite like Sancha Monica. Tucked away in the basement of a shopping mall, the menu has all the fan favorites: fatty tuna, sea urchin, and salmon roe, alongside a selection of wine, an uncommon pairing for sushi, which is usually enjoyed with sake or green tea. Though a la carte is available, I recommend the prix menu, which features the best of their seafood selection, with free-flowing wine and soft drinks for 90 minutes. Make sure to book in advance. If you're looking for a nightcap, look no further than Coffee Bar Silo. Duck under an arched doorway on Susuran-dori Street, and you'll find the dimly lit bar with just a handful of counter seats. You're welcomed with a hot towel and an assortment of chocolates and nuts to nibble on while you sip. The bartenders are thoughtful and passionate, taking the time to explain where each element of your chosen cocktail is sourced from, and even show you the bottle of the spirit you're drinking. If you're feeling something citrusy, get their Kochi Yuzu Gin and Tonic, a refreshing take on a classic G&T with a Japanese twist. If you're in the mood for a kick of caffeine, go for the Herbal Espresso Martini, a fragrant, floral version of the traditional cocktail. Open until late with an extensive menu of creative and tasty concoctions, this little speakeasy is the perfect way to end the day and your food tour of Sanganjaya.
We are back with The Curator, our highlight show here on Monocle Radio. If you were paying any attention to the world of cinema last summer, you may have noticed the excitement around the Barbie film. From its hilarious portrayals of real-life dolls, silly one-liners, and the catchy soundtrack, the movie was a pink pop culture explosion. Following so-called Barbie summer, London's Design Museum has taken the excitement in their stride and are throwing a Barbie 65th birthday party. Their new show, simply named Barbie the Exhibition, centers around the toy's influence on fashion, architecture, and design, proving to the public Barbie was a trendsetter long before the film's release. Monocle's Monica Lillis went down to the site to find out more.
It doesn't take a lover of toys to notice the influence Barbie has on the world. And with the release of the hugely successful Barbie movie last year, the doll coupled with her brand were catapulted back into the forefront of public consciousness. However, the doll, owned by multinational toy company Mattel, has long been intertwined with popular culture. And one place where Barbie's impact is especially pronounced is within the world of fashion and design. This year, Barbie herself turns 65, and to celebrate, London's Design Museum has carefully curated an exhibition dedicated to exploring the brand's relationship with fashion, architecture, and of course, design. It's here I met Danielle Tom, who started by telling me a little bit about the inspiration behind the show.
What we wanted to do in putting on this exhibition was to consider the idea of Barbie, the history of Barbie, through that design lens, and in so doing, to acknowledge the importance of the doll and of her world to generations of children. The fact that Barbie was and is primarily a toy, the fact that Barbie is, for want of a better phrase, feminine coded, those things do not prevent us from taking it seriously as an example of design. It's one of the most recognizable brands in the world, and we wanted to explore why that was.
The exhibition is a colourful display of over 250 objects, from impressive film costumes, a display of the dolls through the ages, and even a chandelier of cascading plastic hair. We start at the beginning, though, with Ruth Handler's hallowed first creation.
When you enter the space, the very first thing you encounter is the original Barbie herself, the doll that started it all from 1959, and she's on her pedestal for everyone to see, because the doll itself was a pivotal moment in the history of toy design. Barbie was arguably the first adult-bodied, adult-faced fashion doll. And her launch in 1959, although it had originally been greeted with some scepticism, was to prove pivotal. So you encounter this first Barbie, and alongside the doll, we're playing the original commercial from 1959.
Barbie, you're beautiful. You make me feel...
Barbie's debut saw her clad in a black and white striped swimming costume, coupled with cat-eye white sunglasses, and her signature blonde hair swooped into a curly ponytail. From her emergence, it was clear that Barbie and fashion would be synonymous. Tom explains.
And all the gadgets gals adore.
In the first instance, by which I mean the first decade of Barbie's existence, her wardrobe, if you like, is reflective of a kind of high fashion ideal. It's very influenced by European couture, but also American sportswear. We're talking established designers like Bonnie Cashin, for example, or in Europe, Dior and Balenciaga. So what Barbie wears at first is reflective of what was seen in high fashion magazines like Vogue, for example. It anticipated this idea of the aspirational adult world. In the late 60s, Barbie's whole look changes. The doll itself is redesigned, but so is her wardrobe. And it's much more in keeping with mod style and this idea of, swinging London and the miniskirt and go-go boots and so on. So all through the decades, Barbie's wardrobe has mapped onto mainstream trends. In more recent years, I think there has been a marked influence coming from the Barbie brand outwards to the consumers. One of the most obvious examples of that, of course, is the recent Barbie core phenomenon. It does go back a bit further than that. If you look at the work of Moschino under its previous creative director, Jeremy Scott, Scott was very heavily influenced by Barbie as a child, and in 2015 he actually put out an entire catwalk collection which was Barbie themed. I think the idea of Barbie core and what it stands for doesn't necessarily reflect what Barbie herself actually has worn. It sort of takes this idea of the brand and distills it down into a series of core elements.
The world of Barbie in design also extends well beyond her wardrobe. With the introduction of the Dream House in the early 1960s, the brand began to also centre around the world of architecture and interior design. Tom tells me more.
This is the very first Barbie Dream House, which was released in 1962. It's made entirely from cardboard, so it actually came as a folded up box with a carrying handle. And then the idea is that you would unclip it and unfold it, and it folds out into what's effectively a kind of studio apartment. It's also positioning Barbie as, again, keeping up with the times, on trend without necessarily being cutting edge. So all of the furniture here, it is rendered in cardboard, of course, but it's archetypally mid-century modern. You can see the influence of designers like Florence Knoll or George Nelson on this very angular, geometric, quite clean-lined furniture, and the colour story as well. Yellows, touches of pink, sort of very saturated blues, very mid-century, very in keeping with its time.
And naturally, it's hard to imagine Barbie without thinking pink.
Barbie pink as an idea, if you like, is something that doesn't really come into being at the very beginning of the brand's history. It's not until the very late 1970s, perhaps 1980, that Barbie gets associated with pink in such an indelible way. That's the moment when the brand's packaging becomes consistently pink. It's the moment where all of a sudden Barbie's various accessories, her houses and so on, are all being produced in pink. Prior to that, there's much more colour variation. And you'll see in the show that some of the early dream houses are quite unexpected to someone who's familiar with the brand identity of today. So I think that pink has had the success that it has, not only because of those connotations that you mentioned, femininity, romance in some contexts, but also because it offered a kind of visual uniformity that allowed the brand to be immediately recognisable in a retail context, in a media context. And that kind of legibility and ubiquity is priceless in retail and marketing terms.
It's clear that this exhibition strips away the notion that this doll is just a toy. And the Barbie brand has long been a trailblazer in the world of marketing, design and fashion. Barbie has historically reflected trends and influenced contemporary designers and will continue to do so for years to come. For Monocle Radio, I'm Monica Lillis.
And finally on the show, a very special one. The Brazilian architect Isay Weinfeld shares why he strives to avoid repetition in his projects and practice architecture without ego.
I don't find any inspiration in architecture at all. My world is very wide. I'm very curious. I don't like this word also, inspiration, but I am a very strong consumer of movies. Then I love films. I was a director in the beginning of my career. Music is the big passion of my life. Theater, dance, art, fashion.
Architecture is not your main thing, I guess.
No.
Thing.
It's something that I'm doing in the last 50 years, but it's not the most important thing in my life, for sure.
How do all these different things that you're interested in and passionate about, how do they all feed and complement each other? How does the film complement the architecture? Does the art complement the film?
Everything goes through a funnel. At the end is a kind of architecture. But maybe for this reason, I can make a comparison. Maybe I always want to do something new in my work, not to have a formula, not to repeat myself, to try to turn the table and to risk and to do eventually things that goes wrong, but trying. Then I'm very proud not to have a style. But let's say talking to compare with a filmmaker, you see, for example, Woody Allen, that is one of my idols, but he's doing the same film of his life, and I love it. But I am more like Kubrick. He did so many different genres of film, but it's the same Kubrick. He did the romance, war, science fiction, everything completely different, but it was done by the same man. Then this is more or less nothing to compare with Stanley Kubrick, but this is maybe more the kind of thing that I love to do.
Why are you willing to take risks? And secondly, why don't more people do that?
It's very comfortable. If you find your style in your life, then you repeat this the whole life. It's very simple because you had the success already when people define your style. It's very easy in your office because you have a formula. You don't need to develop a new door hand every time because you have already this in your office done before. Then it's more work. Then I think not to take risk. It's so boring. If you find your style finally in life and then you repeat yourself for the next 30 years doing the same and having success and having money and to be safe, to have an office that can survive with this. This is not my cup of tea, let's say. It's not the way I feel. It's boring to do the same thing. Even in my office, I was never specialized in anything. From the beginning, I told the people, in a way through architecture, that I was able to design residential building, discotheques, restaurants, apartments, houses, everything. And it's not because I am a wonderful talent. It's because it's the same thing always. And I like this because I'm not repeating myself. I'm finding new ways to speak because now I am mature. I have the whole life that I lived in my shoulders. Then it's completely different now. Then this is a new sensation, something new that will surprise you. And then you can surprise people also.
I love that. Speaking of looking for new sensations, I know you've just done a postgraduate degree in writing. I know, you've got a book of short stories. Is this also part of it? Like not just pursuing creativity in architecture, but pursuing creativity elsewhere or learning elsewhere? Does that also feed into, I guess, the work that you do?
Yes, I love to learn new things. I'm always learning things that I love, music, astronomy, so many different things. And one of the most strong things about myself is humor. Can you imagine putting this humor in architecture? It will be a tragedy. Then I need other kinds of expression to this humor go into people, but not through architecture. Then this is why I wrote a book. This is what I did, feature films and short films I'm still doing. This is why I make art. And to go, the Instagram thing that I will launch a new book.
Instagram. Tell us about the Instagram.
The Instagram was every Sunday in the morning. During 10 years, I went to the outskirts of São Paulo, a city with 20 million people, to make some photographs about the amazing pieces of architecture outside the city.
And these are forgotten, unknown.
That is better than the architecture in the city, can you imagine? But people are something they don't like very much, but always with a view of criticism and humor, but mainly to criticize the society, our ways of behaving. And this was the Instagram that will turn to a book now.
Thank you very much, Isay. I'm a big fan of his buildings. And that's all we've got time for this week's edition of The Curator. The show was produced by David Stevens and presented by me, Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Join us again next week, and thank you very much for listening.